Hello, everybody. Are you guys all refreshed? Yay. Hallelujah. Okay, so I'm going to actually talk today mostly about our recent experience with accreditation and what it's actually did for us and what it's hopefully going to do for us in the future, what the plan is. But I would really like to just say a couple of things ahead of time. First of all, this is the first time our program's gone through accreditation. I've done many of them in other kind of venues before, but it was an interesting process to go through. The second thing I'd say is that I'm hoping some of the things that we have might be helpful to you. I just completed a peer review in another province, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, that would have been helpful to them had they used maybe some of those same processes or some of those small details that might have been useful. And some things that we didn't find useful, and you might have, but we didn't. So I'm going to talk about some of those things, and just from the perspective of what might be helpful, what's not, what kinds of things did we find difficult, and then how we're going to use the information going forward. So basically, doing accreditation is a bit like this. So someone says, this is what we want you to do. And then someone says, well, I think maybe the project leader says, I think they want it like this. And then this analyst comes along and gives you a different picture altogether. And then in the end, all I really wanted was a tire swing. It's not as complicated as we'd like to make it sometimes. So I think we do have to take a step back and say, what is somebody really asking for? They're asking for a story. We sometimes make it really complicated. And then why do we do it? Well, we do it because we want the credibility, right? We want validation that what we're doing is the thing that everyone is looking for. We want some internal validation. So from a college point of view, having an accreditation is a big deal. And externally, it means that we're accepted and we're doing the right kinds of things for our students and for our customers. And we want to do it because we want to be able to say, where can we improve? What are we doing well? What aren't we doing well? So at the beginning, we did a lot of review of what do I really think this all means, and we sat in a room and went through it a number of times. We tried to confirm what our own goals were out of it, and I think that that's one of the things. Sometimes we get overwhelmed by accreditation and saying, well, I'm going to do whatever it takes so that someone will give me that accreditation for 6 years. But we have goals ourselves out of it, and those should be primary. Laying out the timeline, I think having done some of the other ones before, I was aware it was going to take a lot more time. But it's either time or it's, you can shorten the timeline and then you're going to be spending every day working on it, or you can lengthen the timeline and make sure you get an opportunity to really look at where you're struggling and where you're actually working on things. So you have to determine that timeline. We actually started about 9 months in advance to really sort of like birthing a baby, you know, you got to put the whole thing together. And then actually communicating that plan, both to the staff that are working with you and also externally within your own department, to be able to say, I might need your help in these areas. We have a number of other programs that have been through accreditation very successfully, and a number of them have really good points to make and a lot of information. So what can I glean from somebody else? What else can I borrow or use that is going to help me? So both the internal and the external communication of that plan was important. What can we use? The experience of others that actually have done other institution accreditations is, I think, useful. If you have someone else who brings some of that, even if it's someone who's going to read what you've written already, they need to be able to look at it from the point of view of another accreditation and that another institution that says, well, is this actually meeting does it describe enough what I would need to know if I don't know anything about your program? A previous program design experience, I think from our point of view, that was helpful. And the reason I say that is that if you've done program design, or you've had to actually design something from the very beginning, which both Karen and Nancy have, and I have, you actually are starting to talk about that program design in a way that will make sense to an accreditor to say, how are we actually building our program, and how are we building a student with the skills that are, when they started our program, they don't have them, and when we graduate them, they're going to have them. So having that piece in that document is a huge plus. So finding someone with some of those kinds of skills, if you don't have it within your own department, is really useful. Support staff from other areas. For example, we had people from other departments within SAIT. Now, some people don't have that, but we actually had people from other areas who said, okay, we do curriculum design, we've got all this data, we're gonna give you that information. So not trying to just create it all yourself. What else do you have? Who else is gonna give you that information? And I would say the OTA and PTA EAP staff were very helpful. I mean, giving us some decent guidelines, some background, some things that we had questions about, going back and saying, so we're not really sure how we're supposed to do this, and getting good, quick, reliable answers was helpful. This is basically what we were trying to avoid. We didn't want just a drib of information at the end. What we wanted was something useful. So I think sometimes, a lot of times, we look at it as a task to do, and that's not what we were after. So we actually started with the accreditation document. We picked out where we thought we met the criteria already and could easily find the information that we needed. And then we put everything out on a table, and it took up the entire room. We really should have had pictures of us walking around the room looking at all those different criteria and saying, what is going to fit that, what is going to fit this? And we did generate a lot of paper the first time through. But it did give us the opinions for everybody. Basically, we made all of our staff walk around the room and say, what, for this standard, what part of our program do you think meets that? And that, it was a good place to start. And at least we were standing and moving and not sitting still. But we decided partway through to change the focus to a quality assurance and improvement. So, I mean, the initial piece was, we're just going to try to meet the standards, because that's kind of where we were at. But when we went back, we said, how do we meet the criteria, and how well do we meet it? And I think it's the second one that we sometimes say that we're missing. The how is not so difficult to actually find. And you can say it's this particular area and that's what we do. But how well we do it has the context with it that makes it easier for a peer review team to say, this is why we chose this. And then how do we tell people how we did it? So we said that those accreditation standards say, what do we expect our students are able to do on graduation? And what do our employers expect? What does someone else across the country expect? And what does the government expect? And then what can we do, and what can we afford to do? And by affording, I don't just mean by money, I also mean by time. We only have so much time. When, for our example, Alberta Health Services comes down and says, all your students must now have a program that is standardized that says you must teach lifts and transfers this way. So we had to find a place to put it, and we had to make sure that they had it. Well, if you put it on a Saturday, they don't come, and your staff are willing to say, you do it, because I'm not coming on Saturday. No, they were actually very willing. If you put it stuff it into another area, are you meeting the needs of the students? So actually what we ended up doing is we do it with the OTs from the University of Alberta, and they come up to our site and we actually do it all together. So we're meeting an interprofessional need and an actual need for our criteria to be able to match what our employers expect, and very little extra cost because we're actually partnering up with another group. So we're paying one instructor to come from our program, our students are showing up, and an instructor from another area is coming in to assist with that. So it's the creativity on how you're doing it that allows you to actually get to what you need in terms of meeting those criteria. And the affordability is an issue. We actually have a bit of a problem, and mostly it's mine, I'll say that. Pedagogy is based on delivering education to students who have virtually no skills. Andragogy is based on delivering education to adults who are already learners. We have very little pedagogy and a great deal more andragogy within all of our programs. And the challenge is actually making that a different way of teaching and different expectations of students. So we did emphasize that in our report to the team because it really changes how we've actually expected students to behave. We did use the novice to expert work, which is originally done by Dreyfus and then was redone by Patricia Benner for defining educational skills for healthcare. And the original piece is it allows you to do that quality improvement lens by determining what are you building in your students, where are you starting, and what do you expect to see at the end. And this also helps with your conceptual framework, so both of those things. So this one has those 5 developmental stages, this novice, competence, proficiency, expertise, and mastery. As students become more skilled, they depend less on abstract principles and more on concrete experience. So as you do this, it actually allows you to move that opportunity and skill acquisition in anyone that you're teaching from the novice to the actual proficiency level. So we said, when we looked at Benner, these are the ways that Benner took it to actually apply it to nursing. So a novice has no experience whatsoever. A novice advanced beginner is marginally acceptable performance. Competent is moderate specific experience. Proficient is moderate broad experience. And an expert is extensive experience and they're intuitive. We don't expect people to get to an expert level when we graduate them. Absolutely not. We may expect proficiency in some areas, but it's not broad experience. We couldn't really use that definition. But do we want them to actually have competency in their areas that we're teaching them? Yes. So we said those are the top 3 that we're actually going to use. We're going to say at the most appropriate levels are using these 3. The students coming in the program are novice. They basically have no experience, and it's most students on admission. We have some who are much more experienced, and I'll give you an example that's outside of rehab. We have a student coming in the fall who is a Syrian refugee into our pharmacy assistant program. He is a pharmacist in Syria, a graduate pharmacist. I said, why are you coming into this program, for heaven's sakes? You're gonna blow everybody out of the water and probably teach half the program. And he said, I gotta start somewhere, and they want my transcripts, and I graduated from Aleppo. He said, there aren't any anymore. The university's blown up. I have no way of getting them. So he's prepared to start at a very low-level course, but he's not a novice coming in. We have students who come into our program that have degrees in phys ed and in some other areas. We have students that come in that maybe were physical therapists in a different country, but they're still novice to our systems of healthcare, and they may be novice to some of the areas of care that we're actually expecting from them. So in saying they're novice, we're saying that on a global perspective, even though some of our students are not novice. we would expect that by a certain time in their program that they're going to be at marginally acceptable performance. And we've said the benchmark should be at the end of their first year, that they should be able to have an acceptable performance in certain areas, and that our goal for our graduates is that they're competent. The goal of the program is to have those people that are graduates competent in the required skills and capable of learning to move them to the next level. So how do we say this in our document? It was pretty much, I was trying to get it to go onto the computer for a lot of weekends and evenings. I wasn't having a lot of success. No. In the end, it was, we wanted to tell the story of how our program handles each standard. What are the program things that actually support this opportunity for students to move from novice to competent? What's the faculty credentials that are going to help students move to competency in these areas? What are the methods of teaching our students and the kinds of students we have coming in that are going to move them through the program? How do we know we're accomplishing what we expected to accomplish? And how do we tell people about our program? Is it consistent, accessible? Is it safe? Is it fair? Are we saying what we actually mean? So when we put that story together, this is the kind of thing we came up with our conceptual model. It was built on top of what another one from another program at our college used. Basically, what we were looking to do is to say it couldn't be too busy. It couldn't actually give you just an overall idea that, okay, that doesn't mean anything to me. What we were actually after is saying we build from those novices into what our graduates are ready to practice. So it had to follow the same concepts going forward. And however you structure it in your document, if you're looking at that same idea of moving students through from novice to competent, then what are the things that you're actually using to get them there? So you're using both technical skills, employability skills, and you're using that content, you're using the context in which it's delivered in. So we left those pieces together. I don't think this is perfect by any imagination, but I do believe that at least what we're at is at a point where we could say, yes, this is what we're trying to achieve in a picture format. And I know lots of people have struggled with that whole model. What does that mean? How do I express this? This is one way to do it. We have another one that we played with a little bit. Again, it was very complicated and it didn't allow for enough detail on it, but we at least felt that this was useful in presenting what we were trying to approach, which was that novice to competency. The other thing we actually did was said, how do we actually lay out our program? What makes sense for a review team to look at that says what's delivered when, how is it delivered, what kinds of things go with other things, what kinds of areas at a glance to be able to flip back and forth between things so that you can say, okay, so now I want to see where's the novice piece in, what's in orientation to rehab that is novice, what links to that later on, where could I pick some of those pieces out? And this actually also helped us to be able to say, okay, so now when we go back and look at where are we going to actually take Standard 6 from, we could pull each one of those courses out and say, here's where that belongs, here's where it's built from, here's where it goes from novice to competency. So it's a useful tool to just kind of lay out what your program looks like and what you're after, and taking those same concepts that are within that conceptual model and putting it in another way. Because sometimes people just need that concrete piece that says, I just need something that's in front of me to be able to refer to all the time. So some of it is in making sure that that communication piece meets both the people who need a picture and the people who need a piece of paper to refer to with just plain words on it. So when we were tackling Standard 6, we went through and said, from a quality improvement lens, what do we teach when and how does it support the expected outcomes? And we went back and said, for each of our areas of the program, where was the concept introduced for the novice? Where was it developed for get to an advanced beginner stage? And where was it integrated so we're moving people towards competency? And when we lay that out in those 3 levels, we're then referring back to our conceptual model. We're building on that through Standard 6, and we're allowing for our program to actually demonstrate those things. And we said, does the sequence make sense? Do we have enough there for each one of those areas? How do the students practice the concept? So we all struggle with how do they practice communication with other team members. That's one that's tough to work with. We struggle sometimes with the communication and the reporting back. Lots of students do, they get nervous. Is there enough time for the practice, or are we not giving them enough guidelines for it? What are the things that we need them to actually practice to get there? And how do we measure that knowledge and skill level? How do we actually know that they've met those criteria and that they have moved from novice now to competent? How do we know that? So we were trying to avoid this too. If you get all the information you possibly can and just think about something to do with it later, it ends up being a big mess. It has to have that framework in it that's a foundation all the time and not the extraneous information. Because something that's extraneous is just a bubble out here and it's going to create problems for you. So just limit the information. We were trying to get it down to the small enough piece that told the story but didn't create more problems for people who are trying to review it and figure out where did it fit, or created more questions. So it has to be purposeful data collection. We're fortunate enough to have a very good group within the college that actually does a lot of data collection for us. So we don't have to do all of it ourselves. But there are some good pieces that can be borrowed between colleges that would probably be really helpful for others. No one owns these, and they wouldn't be difficult for people to say, okay, we don't have this, have you got something we can use? The clear statements for the readers, ensuring that when you're saying this information is for this purpose. So although you have that information included, you want to be sure that for whatever information you have, you're clear to the review team or even to yourselves, why did we include this? What's going to be the use of this? And it should be useful to us as well as to the peer review team. There's no point in me including something just because it meets accreditation standards. I've got to be able to use it as well. Are the examples that we use accessible? Do they make sense to people, or are we picking the weirdest and wonderful one that's way off the wall as an example? We don't want to do that. And is it organized in a way that's going to be really simple to review and read? So we looked at the different ways that were offered to us through the documents that were in accreditation. And when we looked at it, we said, okay, well, that makes sense. But if I read that, I wouldn't actually know what kind of concept this is. I wouldn't know if it was built from one thing to the other, and I don't know where that is. So when we used it, we actually said, what's the course? What's the concept? This is actually just a little bit different, but we actually said, what semester is it in? What kinds of pieces does it give us for the activity? And then what's the assessment or the evaluation of that? And to tell you the truth, this is probably the better option that we landed on in the end. We didn't have this much detail in the first piece, but what it does now is it says, if I'm going to move something because I'm finding my students are not getting a certain concept, and I'll speak to our anatomy and physiology program. We've had other people teaching it in the past. They're just following the process along, but then we're teaching muscles Karen's teaching muscles at the very beginning of September, and they're not getting to muscles and anatomy and physiology until November. Well, that's ridiculous. So Nancy is now teaching anatomy and physiology, much as she'd love to crawl under the table and say, no, not again. And we're changing not the content, but when those pieces are delivered, so that we're actually supporting all of the information and how that is delivered to make sure that those programs are actually in sync with each other. So that's a very simple example, but it allows us in here to say, what would we do differently? How would we actually support something differently if we needed to make a change? Or if we moved something in a different way, how would we actually move it? And what impact would it have on other areas? Is it still a novice area? What's the next step and what's built for that? So this one's on communication. The developing concepts go into the second term. So you can see semester 1, semester 2, and then semester 3 would be probably in practicum. What would we expect from them in practicum? So as we moved forward, each one of those actually shows the novice to competent area, and that's what we wanted in each area. And I believe that this is one of the things that makes it simpler. Now, I've done the paramedic accreditation not too long ago using the Excel spreadsheet piece, and I did really go back and do the Excel spreadsheet at the very end using this process, and I did not find it useful as either a reviewer or as someone trying to build it. It doesn't allow for the same kind of level of detail, and it is much more difficult to actually work in unless you're going to include this level of detail. So, and I actually found the same thing with the paramedic program. It was very difficult to actually get all of the information you wanted and the descriptors in there in a way that's easy to read. So I think overall it's an interesting concept and idea, but it is very much more time consuming as a reviewer, and it's harder to manage the editing of it over time. So that's just our experience. Whether others have had different experiences, I'm not sure. We did use both, and I'm going to include some of the things around just process. We started using the PDF options, but one of the difficulties is as we start checking to see how easy is it to flip from one thing to the other, it's a nuisance because PDF doesn't allow you to actually go back easily to the part you started from. So we actually went to a Word document, had all the documents in one folder, numbered each one so that each standard would actually have multiple areas of evidence with it. So if you look here, you'll see, I don't know if this thing's got a pointer, does it? Does it have a pointer? Oops, oh, that wasn't it.
I haven't tried that actually, sorry.
Oh. So if you see on the far right-hand side in the bullet, you'll see criterion 6, 6.1, and then it's 6.1.1.9. So in that area, we had 9 documents associated with it. If anyone wanted to go back and look at all of them, it's very easy to find them within the structure of the folders and the way they're laid out. And it's very easy to flip back and forth between what's in the Word document and what is the evidence. And for a lot of people, this is one of their biggest headaches. So the Word document seems to work a little better. You can use unqualified addresses for the links, and there's simple ways to do that. And I'm quite happy to, if anybody has problems with that, I can show you what to do with that. It's really simple, and it allows you to copy it over into onto another area and without any problems. It doesn't work very well for Dropbox, but not very much does in these really, really big documents. So there's different ways that you can do it, but these, the indirect hyperlinks maintain the links when you copy. It's simpler to add and remove documents, so if you decide, no, I don't want to use that one, it's much easier to take one out than it is when you package it all up into one document. So there are a number of things with this that allowed people to make changes and edits over time. And for us, on an ongoing basis, when we change a document for the next time we have to do something, I'm only changing one document. I am not changing an entire package. And frankly, the next person who has to do this will thank me a lot, a lot. So, I mean, part of my background is information system design, and so when I'm looking at this kind of thing, I don't want this to be a headache for somebody else. And as a peer review member, it's very difficult to actually read through things when it's not easy to flip back and forth. So I think there are some things that would really help others if we can actually lay out a process that makes it simpler to use this kind of process. So the piece that was probably more helpful is, what were we missing? What clues did we need to make a change? Were we hunting for things? We couldn't find how it fit. Were we fudging things? Well, it's close enough. Maybe it'll meet the standard. No, it has to meet the standard. Were we stretching to make it fit? In those types of things, we actually found a few things where we said, we need to be more specific. So in any situations where we're hunting or fudging, were we using things twice? If we had to go back and use something twice, there's a couple of things where, yeah, in the communication piece, because we combine it together, yeah, you're going to use it twice. But really, there should be an opportunity that you have an option for more than one element that's going to fit and meet those areas. Did we need to separate the items for OTA and PTA? Yeah. We originally didn't, and then we went back and said, no, that's not right. If we're going to do it and say this meets the criteria, the OTA pieces have to be in there separate from the PTA pieces, not trying to combine them all together. We need to show that we address both. Do we need to do that dreaded intro? Yes. And the reason is because it explains your thought process. I have to say a huge thank you to Nancy, because I did some writing and we had someone else do some writing, and then she said, I don't like this, and went back upstairs and grabbed the OT and said, you're sitting here till we're finished all the intros, and they did them all. So sometimes it's better to go back and have someone who's really good at details and really good at communicating those details well to write those types of things. So look at who you've got on your team that's helping you with this and say, who's got better skills than I do to do this part? Pass the document to others, other instructors, other accreditors. We had someone who is on the accreditation for the medical lab, someone who's done dental. They looked at it. Those who don't know anything about the program. So someone who knows nothing about what you do and about what your students do, if they can read it and understand the whole thing, then you're doing a good job. And take it from those who'll be critical. You can consider the opinions, but you don't have to take their advice. Essentially, if you hear it from more than one source, you better listen to it, because truthfully, that's going to actually allow you to make a change. It's not clear. If 2 or 3 people tell you, I didn't understand this page, I didn't understand what you meant, then something's wrong and you need to do a better job of it. What are the changes you want to make to any of these areas? Using the accreditation document as part of the program review is our next step. So SAID has actually said we have to do program reviews for all our programs. starting right away, and we will set some goals based on some of the goals actually we heard from the PET departments at the University of Saskatchewan, Manitoba. They've done a really good job of their goal setting and what they want to do and what they want to capture, but also based on some of the things that we looked at that flagged us a little bit, that said these are sort of the things we think we're probably going to have to fix. We needed to emphasize more student involvement in the program advisory, so we've solved that. We needed to clarify how we're going to do our OTA placements, and we're actually changing some of that anyway quite a bit. We won't be able to do that till next year. We wanted more student feedback after prac. What did you use the most? What did you use the least? So that we are actually getting things back from students to say, are we teaching things that you never see, that you never get an opportunity to do? And it's not just one or two students that we're looking at, but overall, what's the information coming back? And we need to clarify that evaluation plan and look at what those goals are. Those were our elements. So our plan for the future is we're going to review the document for changes each spring. That's the plan anyway. Because essentially there'll be a couple of us that aren't around to do it again. So we're wanting to make sure that whoever does this actually has an opportunity going forward. So that would be actually replacing any of the documents that have changed. So we're upgrading some of the assessments or changing assessments. Let's change it now, and then we've always got the most recent information. Looking at changes to any of the assignments and so on, but that actually allows us from a program point of view to say, what is the goal in terms of making the change? Why would we make that change? So are there areas that we need to start to reduce our time on, and we need to spend more time on other areas? Do we need to teach laser? Maybe not. So do we have areas where our OTAs are telling us that they didn't get enough training in their bathroom assessment, bathroom transfers, etc. Okay, so how are we going to find the time to put that in? So these are the types of things that we want to make sure in the document and reduce that workload going forward. Accreditation should be about making your program better, not about this. And our hope is that everybody has that experience, that it's not like this.